Presenting will be Dr. Nele Vornier, and she will be presenting on parental investment, school quality, and the persistent benefits of intervention in early childhood. Dr. Vornier is currently a Marie Skłodowska-Curie Research Fellow at the School of Economics and Finance in Queen Mary University, London. Her research is focused on evaluating labor market policies and political economy topics using empirical methods from the field of applied microeconomics and machine learning.
Thank you everyone for joining this webinar. So today I will present some joint research on early childhood intervention in rural China. So there's this growing body of cross-disciplinary research that highlights the importance of early environment in the first years of life for later skill development. Because of the hierarchical nature of brain development, it's kind of found that cognitive deficiencies in early life can permanently hinder further skill development. Also, we know that around 80% of the brain develops in the first 3 years. So this is argued to be quite a unique window of opportunity where interventions could be particularly effective. A lot of this current policy debate on early childhood development interventions comes from some very promising research results from pioneering studies like the Perry Preschool, the Abecedarian, the Jamaican stimulation studies done some 30, 40 years ago. These found large impacts on cognitive skills at school entry, but more importantly, they found that a lot of these impacts persisted into adulthood and translated into increased college attendance, employment, and earnings, as well as reduction in criminal activity. The benefits of this early intervention could be particularly large for low and middle income countries, because it's thought that a lot of children, around 43%, are at risk of having some sort of cognitive delay. And across the literature, the main problem that is often cited is the lack of an environment that is sufficiently stimulating for early skills to develop. So this shows you a map of the world where they kind of try to predict or estimate the prevalence of developmental delay in the population below 5. As you see, this is in China. This is actually not as bad as in other places. However, this is an average, a national average. And as I will explain to you a bit later, this hides quite a lot of regional variation, especially between urban and rural areas. So early childhood development is very high in the policy agenda these days. It's included in the Sustainable Development Goals. There's also been a lot of international development agencies that have called for ECD services to be integrated into health and nutrition programs. So policymakers no longer debate whether early childhood development services are desirable, but rather how these programs can be designed to be cost-effective and sustainable. However, there's two main policy questions that really still need to be resolved in this area of research and policy. The one is the challenge of scaling up. So a lot of the evidence of long-term persistence of benefits of these programs comes from these earlier ECD trials that are really quite small scale efficacy trials. So it's not clear whether these program impacts can be sustained for larger scale interventions that are integrated in existing health and education programs in countries. There is some very recent promising evidence of a couple of RCTs that have been run at scale and that were integrated in existing programs or conditional cash transfer programs. So these are trials in Colombia, in Pakistan, and 2 in China. The other pressing policy question is what really drives, what's the mechanism behind this long-run impact? It's another black box. So even though several studies find that ECD interventions are effectively raising human capital in the short run, a lot of studies also find that these initial skill gains fade out in the medium run. And the only long-term evidence that we have comes from these small-scale efficacy trials. So we don't know whether this would work in scaled-up versions. On the recent trials that were run at scale in Pakistan and Colombia, they have reported some mixed evidence in the medium run. So we find in the Pakistan trial that there's persistence of the program impacts of the ECD intervention, whereas in the Colombia trial, there's complete program fade out of the effects. So in this paper, what we do is we look at the medium run impact of a 6-month home-based parenting intervention that was delivered originally by the Family Planning Commission, and we analyze it through a randomized control trial. What we did in 2014 is that we retrained 70 Family Planning Commission officers to deliver weekly household visits and train parents using a structured curriculum aimed at improving parenting practices. At the end of this program, we found indeed that there were significant gains in infant skill, also significant increases in parental investment, and some modest improvements of parenting skills. We also found that this parenting intervention was progressive. Children who were more disadvantaged at the onset of the program benefited more of the intervention. Now, in this new paper, these previous findings have been published this year, but in this new paper, we're actually looking at 2.5 years later, and we find that program impacts are persistent. We find that the children in treatment villages have significantly higher working memory skills. And we also find that in these treatment villages, parents continue to spend more time with their children, but more importantly, they also enroll them earlier and in better preschools. This finding of this kind of persistent intervention effect on the parental preschool decision, we think is quite an important contribution because it's also the first study that is able to collect follow-up data on this particular investment channel. And this might lead to more long-run, we hope, intervention effects because previous research has shown that it really matters when and where parents decide to enroll their offspring. So I'm quickly going to say something about the picture of developmental delay in rural China. Then I'll talk about the ECD intervention, the data we have gathered, and then we'll go to the empirical strategy and results. So developmental delay in rural China. So the picture I just showed you before showed that on average it was between 20 and 40% of children that were estimated to have some sort of cognitive delay. However, this is data from a study in the same province where we have done this parenting intervention, where we follow up a cohort of children and we test them every 6 months with the Bailey early childhood test. And so as you can see, at 6 months, there's not much of a problem, but there's a big jump in the prevalence of cognitive delay between 12 months and 18 months. And so at 18 months, we find that around 40%, even more than 40% of our sample is classified as having a cognitive delay. So this is very big. In terms of what that means for China's future labor force, if we think about the fact that in poor rural areas, they are home to nearly half of China's 3-year-olds. And if half of these kids are cognitively delayed at the age of 2, then that's quite a big scale. That's a lot of human capital loss for a middle-income country. So at the time of when we planned this intervention, there was a relaxation of the one-child policy. And so we wanted to, the first research question we wanted to answer was whether we could integrate this intervention into an existing governmental program or structure. So the Family Planning Commission was our natural candidate because in terms of scale, they are one of the largest bureaucracies in the world, and they have representation into all villages. They've also been historically in charge of keeping the birth records, so they have a lot of information. And there's also a lot of human capital in this agency. However, of course, despite having the perfect infrastructure to roll out an ECD service, we were not sure whether families would be willing to engage with the family planning officials and whether these could be retrained in a short period of time. So the first paper that now is published was really all about, like, can they manage to shift from managing the quantity of human capital to effectively raise the quality of human capital in China. And we did find that that was the case. So here, this is about a parenting intervention. It was implemented between November 2014 and April 2015. The curriculum was loosely based on the Jamaican home visiting model. And so it was developed in collaboration with early childhood experts in China and also the Family Planning Commission itself. It were weekly sessions that contained 2 modules, plus an additional module on health and nutrition. We trained parents, so the parenting trainers were selected by the Family Planning Commission itself, and we gave them a 1-week training covering theories of early childhood development, parenting skills, and the curriculum. This was then also complemented with weekly follow-up training by our field team on the curriculum to deliver that week. This is a picture of the toys we used. This is our fully scriptured curriculum for each week. This is a picture taken during the parenting training of the Family Planning Commission officers. So in terms of who are these parenting teachers, they're 60% male, they're around 34 years old, most of them are married, they have a child, 30% has a bachelor degree, and they've been working on average for 12 years at the Family Planning Commission. The location of our intervention is in Shangluo district within Shaanxi province. So in terms of what data we collected at the follow-up, so this is 2.5 years after the initial program has completed, we go back and we collect data on infant skills, parental investment behavior, and preschool and teacher characteristics. So we followed we went to all the schools where the sample children were enrolled and questions both teachers and head teachers. Infant skills were measured using the Weschler Preschool Primary Scale of Intelligence. So this measures 5 main IQ skills, but these IQ skills are also a bit overlapping with executive functioning skills. So verbal comprehension, visual spatial, fluid reasoning, working memory, and processing speed. Because of the way the tests are administered, basically each item increases in difficulty. So if you would just take the simple average, you would probably have quite a noisy measure of underlying ability. So in the first step, what we do here is that we use the raw item data and we estimate a 2-parametric logic item response model, which gives us a better weighted score. This takes into account the difficulty level and discrimination ability of items. In terms of parental time and material investment, we are asking parents how much time they spent on a whole set of child-rearing activities on the previous day. And we also ask them how much money they have spent last year on child-related expenditures. We then use exploratory factor analysis to determine the dimension reduction that we need to do. And we find that in both cases of time and material investment, the 1-factor model performs best. Then we also collect data on parental preschool enrollment decision. So the enumerators collected information on 165 preschools. And here we have preschool characteristics such as tuition fees, school size, share of pupils receiving government aid, teacher characteristics such as age, gender, experience, salary, education, whether they received the teacher training. Structural quality, so here we look at pupil to teacher ratio, the number of activity rooms, the size of the outdoor play area, and designated playroom or exercise room. And lastly, we also collect some measures of process quality. So whether or not teachers engage in a set of teaching activities, such as reading books, organizing physical exercise, and art and music classes.
2 minutes, Dr. Vernia.
Sorry?
2 minutes, please.
Yeah. Okay. So here as well, we extract the first factor, so that captures like a measure, an index of general preschool quality. So for our preschool quality index, we have schools that are bigger, that have younger and more educated teachers that are more likely to have received teacher training and that score high on both structural and process quality measures. Basically, it's a clustered randomized design. We enroll all 18 to 30-month-old infants in the sample villages. We have stratified the design by county, and then we randomize at the village level. Then we use OLS to estimate treatment effects, and we condition on control variables, which are the baseline development scores, and we also condition on county fixed effects. This is the balance table. So here, I think what's interesting is if you look at number 9, the level of cognitive delay. So as I showed you before, this is quite high, around 40% of our sample at the beginning of this intervention is cognitively delayed. We don't see that with motor delay, which is around 10%. When we look in panel C here, this is just to show you how baseline parenting looks like in this region, and it's quite poor. So there's only 10% of parents that told a story to the baby yesterday, only 5% that read a book, and then 30% of parents indicate they sang a song or played with their baby in the day before. On average, they only have 2 books, so low parenting indicators. We don't
please wrap up. Please
Sorry?
wrap up, Dr. Verne, if you could please wrap up.
Yeah. Okay, so the results, so we find that very strong medium run treatment effect on working memory, and not on any other of these scales. Here you see in panel E that this is across the whole ability distribution, so there's a whole shift across that distribution. Then we look at the program treatment effects on parental investment. So we find slightly more parents have enrolled, parents in treatment villages have enrolled their children at the time of the study, but more importantly, they do so 2 months on average earlier, and they enroll in significantly better quality preschools. And I think that's really the main important finding. We also find they still spend more time with their children in treatment villages, but not they don't spend more money on them. So the conclusion is that basically a large proportion of China's future labor force is cognitively delayed at the age of 2 years. We find that using the extensive bureaucracy of the Family Planning Commission to deliver ECD parenting intervention can significantly increase skills. We find that this program can be progressive. We also find, and that's the conclusion of this latest study, that these impacts are persistent. 2.5 years after the intervention completion, we find persistent effects on child working memory and parental investment. Especially this finding on improved parental preschool decision might be a very important contribution, which could lead to sustained benefits in the long term. So thank you for, thank you for the
Thank you very much, Dr. Vernier. Very interesting presentation. Let's move quickly to questions. Let me read out one question that was in the chat box. This is from Khadija Jamil. She asks, how can unskilled or uneducated parents contribute to a child's cognitive education?
Yeah, so thank you. So the question, sorry, I didn't hear it, but is it, how can unskilled parents contribute to, yeah. So I think a lot of these curriculums are really based on increasing the interaction time between parents and children. So it's often very basic things as just talking enough to children at early ages. There's in a lot of low and middle income countries, there's this belief that you should only start engaging with children when they can talk. So a lot of parents, so this is some anecdotal evidence that we found that parents would be embarrassed in the beginning to speak to their children because the children couldn't speak, so what's the use? And so a lot of this curriculum is kind of making them understand that it's very important to, even though children can't yet speak, that you start engaging and speaking with them very early on. Does that answer the question? Yeah.
I think that's fine, Dr. Werner. Could I ask Brian Kim, you seem to have a question and a comment. Could you just unmute your microphone and proceed?
Yes. So like I already typed in the chat box.
Linda, Brian, sorry. So Linda, please keep the question short. I think compared to other sessions, this session is a bit behind. Okay, sorry.
We need to wrap up in about 1 minute. Brian, please.
Right. So can you as I typed in, who measure the outcomes, and second one is I think you need to adjust multiple hypothesis testing. The link might be helpful. And my last question is that, do you have short-term outcomes? And can you compare short-term and long-term outcomes? What's the difference between these two in your sample?
Yes. So so let me first answer your second question. So we indeed have short-term outcomes, and this is now published at the Economic Journal, so you can find that online if you're interested. And we find no effect on motor, but we find very strong effects on cognitive development, which was measured with the Bailey scale. Then in terms of multiple hypotheses, yes, you're correct, but we only find effects here on working memory. And so there's not really much need to, there's just no other effects on these other dimensions. So we haven't bothered doing that. But in our first study, where we actually look at, for example, different parental investment channels, we do control for multiple hypothesis testing.
I think we'll need to leave it there. Thank you very much, Dr. Werner,